And what I found really interesting was that I think they said this, that Gaia, or Mother Earth, is moving into, or was moving into, the fourth density in 2012.
Right.
And it's so interesting that they're saying 2012, and this is channeled in the 80s, and then 2012 happens, and it's all about the Mayan calendar. And I was like, here comes 2012 again.
Yes.
It's awesome.
It was some big cosmic event that we all knew. The Mayans sort of identified it, but no one really had an answer for, like, what does this really represent? And I love that about the law of one, is it gives you a really great answer for that question of what was that whole 2012 thing about. And Ra describes it as the Earth's ascension to a fourth density vibration. And basically the densities of consciousness represent quite literally the speed of vibration of the photon in that density. And so the more dense light is in any particular dimension, the more information there is, right? Light is information. The more information there is, the more ability for consciousness to express itself. So as we go up the 7 densities, there's more and more ability or capacity for consciousness to express itself, which is why, 4th, 5th, and 6th density beings possess abilities in consciousness like telepathy, nonverbal communication, teleportation, things like that, time and space travel, that seem magical to us because we're in these very heavy, dense 3rd density bodies that we don't have the hardware for those kinds of abilities yet. In the same way that my dog doesn't have the hardware to talk to me in English or understand what the economy is or things like that. He just doesn't have that available. But consciousness is not limited. Consciousness is just flowing through these mediums we call bodies. And it's the body that is the filter for consciousness that dictates what abilities it can express. So each density allows consciousness more and more capacity for that. So Earth moved from 3rd to 4th density in 2012, which means that we as individual entities also have that ability now if we're ready and willing to do the work, basically.
Fascinating. And where does dimensions come into the picture then? Because so many people are speaking about we're moving into the 5th dimension and that Gaia is in the 5th dimension. And I understood what you said about the density, but why are we then speaking about the 5th dimension?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a really fun and extremely difficult concept to talk about.
What are
as metaphysics are, right?
Yeah.
So a dimension, the best way to think about a dimension is it is a perspective of the universe. But a perspective also will dictate your experience of the universe. So like the 4th dimension is time. Well, time is just a perspective of the universe, right? Linearity or causality, we could say, is time, but it's just a perspective. And so if we have 4 points like a square, say that's a 4th dimension, the 5th dimension is the point on top of the square, which makes it into a pyramid, you could say. So the 5th dimensional perspective of the universe essentially transcends time and is able to look at the 4 dimensions of time through the lens of oneness. Whereas in time separates our perception of the universe because there's a subject object, there's past, present, future. So it seems to split off reality into all these different categories. 5th dimension still is operating in that dimension, but it's not limited by it. It has seen from a higher perspective. And so that 5th dimensional perspective of oneness is equal to the 4th density perspective of oneness. But the density, again, is literally the speed of vibration of the photon. So if the photon's going really slow, like 2nd, 3rd density, consciousness doesn't have the ability to have that realization or seeing of the universe until it starts speeding up. The faster it moves, the more information it can take in, and it can start to expand its awareness and go, oh, all is one. That's a 4th density or 5th dimensional perspective of the universe.
Wow, thank you for explaining that. That made so much sense. I was wondering about this.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah. So right now we are in the third density, according to Ra, and moving into the fourth. Now, moving into the fourth, can we do this in this lifetime, or do we sort of have to wait until our next incarnation, and then it's going to happen, or perhaps in a few incarnations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. In consciousness, you can absolutely ascend to fourth density in this lifetime. The body we have, the chemical vehicle we have, is a third density vehicle, because this is still essentially a third density planet. It's just begun its fourth density evolution. So, maybe in many thousands of years, as evolution continues, the bodies will reflect more and more a green ray or fourth density vibration, which Ra sort of explains becomes more and more a chemical / electromagnetic body, or chemical / light body. So the body will become more and more translucent and more able to access psychic powers. When we see aliens, typically the way they're depicted or whatever, they tend to have much more fragile bodies, sometimes taller, almost sometimes transparent looking. And that's because apparently that's kind of what a fourth density body looks like. And as we get to fifth density, the body becomes entirely a light body. So like, as I was saying earlier, you can literally manifest the body with thought, however you want it to appear, kind of like in a dream or something. When you lucid dream, you just create through thought. It's just like that. So we have to have a third density body, because that's the vehicle we incarnated into. But our consciousness is not limited by the body. So we can ascend to the fourth density by, again, having that loving awareness of the universe, that all is one, all is myself. And the more we engage with it as if it is all me, the more and more the vibrational state of our own consciousness or frequency will expand and increase into a fourth density frequency. And really that looks like what we call enlightenment, or enlightened beings. An enlightened person is somebody who's realized that I am everything, right? And that's what love means.
Yeah, when I was introduced to this material, I sort of came from the mindset that enlightenment, that is sort of the goal, or the top of everything. And then when I discovered that, it's like it's just going on and on and on, and that's just like one of those phases, and it just expands all the time.
Yes.
It's amazing. And when you've been explaining about the different densities and the different octaves that were sort of the journey of the soul moving through the 7 densities, and that's like the musical scales or notes on the scale. And then when we
musical notes,
and then when we come to the 7th, we're starting all over again, in a sense, but from a higher perspective. Or maybe you can just explain it just briefly, because that was
it's so after the 7th density. So the 7th density correlates to the crown chakra, and Ra describes it as the gateway density. So it's the last density in this universe or octave. And once you evolve to the 8th density, that's actually the first density of the next universe, of which we can't possibly really imagine what that would be like. And before this universe is another previous universe that leads into this one, and so on for infinity, which is kind of mind-blowing, right?
Yeah.
But it's also the only thing that makes sense. We all know the universe must be infinite. No capacity for limitation makes sense. So what we call enlightenment, we very much view it as like the finish line, like running across the red ribbon of the finish line with your arms up, right? And in a sense it is, because it's the end of the person, or the belief in separation, the ego. But really it's just the beginning of the next phase of your evolution. Ra explains that in 4th through 7th density, there is no suffering. There's no, I think in 4th density, they say there's some, what you might call suffering, but they describe it as the impatience to be of service to others. Like that sometimes we have to take time for ourselves, and the zealousness of love is so strong in fourth density that learning patience is as close to what we could call suffering as they experience. So that gives you kind of an idea of what lies ahead of us. And Ross says that this third density is by far the shortest and the most intense of all the densities. Ra actually says in one passage there is over like 100 times more suffering present in third density than any other, or it's like 100 times more difficult, because third density is all about what Ra calls the choosing between the positive or the negative polarity. And we have to choose by experiencing an equal amount of both polarities. So it's not that the whole nature of the universe everywhere is this constant fight and battle between the two polarities that we call suffering. So that's actually just a third density experience, and your soul will gravitate one way or the other based on all that incoming catalyst you experience. And basically you'll keep reincarnating here until you choose. Do I want to be service to self or on the negative path? That's equally valid. The universe will allow that. Or do I want the positive path, which means I have to choose love. I have to get beyond this belief that I'm separate and see myself through oneness. And as soon as we get to that state, we are eligible for a fourth density incarnation on a fourth density planet somewhere, or perhaps on Earth in a couple hundred or thousand years, we can come back here again. But really that transition that we call enlightenment, in my experience of this state of oneness, really what it feels like is more like you are a chick pecking at an eggshell from the inside, trying to break out of this belief in separation. And while you're in this eggshell of third density thinking, this appears to be the whole universe, just this cold, dark place. Why am I here? Who's done this to me? And as you peck through that shell and you break out and realize, oh, I'm not that person, I'm not in that shell, you see that actually the whole universe awaits me. Like I've just been born into this universe. This is the beginning of the journey. It's not an ending at all.
Yeah, and even scientists are speaking about multiple universes now. So I think it's very interesting in what they're talking about quantum physics, and that all possibilities are open. And I cannot understand that with my mind, but I believe it actually explains some of metaphysics, actually, quantum physics.
Most definitely. I think the more time goes by since the raw material has been written or channeled, the more and more that science is proving all of these ideas that Ra lays out back in the 1980s.